Prince Naseem Hamed hasn't stepped into the spotlight for years until now. In a late-night live stream, looking thinner, shaken, and clearly terrified, he revealed something boxing officials have quietly buried. According to Naseem, multiple retired fighters are suffering from the same neurological collapse, linked to a medical study that mysteriously vanished from public records. Tonight, he's breaking the news the sport doesn't want you to hear. Subscribe now, because what he just exposed could change boxing forever, and some say it's already too late. For years, Prince Naseem Hamed faded quietly into the background of boxing history. Interviews grew rare, public appearances stopped entirely, and fans assumed he simply chose a peaceful retirement. But in early September, something changed. Out of nowhere, a shaky live stream appeared on his official page. No sponsors, no scheduled announcement, just Naseem, lit only by the glow of his laptop, sitting in a dark room with curtains drawn tight behind him. His once confident posture was gone, his famous grin replaced by a thin, uneasy smile. The chat exploded with excitement, but Naseem barely acknowledged it. He took long, controlled breaths, blinking rapidly as though battling dizziness. The first thing he said wasn't a greeting, it was a whisper. "I'm not the only one." He rubbed his temples between sentences, wincing as if fighting sharp bursts of pain behind his eyes. Then he admitted something his fans had suspected, but never heard from his own mouth. For months, he'd been waking up with severe ringing in his skull, muscle twitches in his jaw, and sudden blackouts lasting seconds. The symptoms didn't match typical post-concussion syndrome. His doctors were stumped. Then he mentioned a name, an old sparring partner who had been experiencing the exact same symptoms. 2 days later, that sparring partner disappeared from social media, followed by a statement from his family that he'd been admitted for observation. No explanation, no diagnosis. Another retired fighter canceled a public signing hours before it started, citing sudden neuromuscular complications. 2 more former boxers posted videos apologizing for pulling out of charity events because of unexpected episodes. At first, fans wrote it off as coincidence. But coincidence doesn't knock on multiple doors at once. Naseem leaned closer to the camera, voice trembling with urgency. He claimed he'd contacted a private neurologist, one who'd quietly treated dozens of fighters from the late 90s and early 2000s. That specialist told him something chilling. Their brain structures showed a vertical compression pattern, like something had pressed down from the top of their skull, folding neural tissue in unnatural layers. At the end of the live stream, Naseem exhaled, exhausted. He said one more sentence before cutting the feed. "This isn't damage from punches. This is damage from procedure." The screen went black, and rumors began spreading like wildfire. Because whatever caused this wasn't in boxing textbooks, it wasn't in medical journals, and it wasn't done yet. Within hours of Naseem's livestream, the boxing community erupted. Twitter threads, Reddit posts, conspiracy forums, everyone had a theory. But while most fans were busy arguing, Naseem's phone rang. Not a text, not a DM, a private number, calling at 2:43 a.m. On the other end was a voice Naseem recognized instantly, even after 20 years. It was Marcus Quinn, a legendary British trainer who quietly disappeared from coaching in 2011. His voice sounded thin, oxygen-starved. He didn't waste time on greetings. "You shouldn't have spoken," Quinn rasped. Naseem asked if he was watching the stream. The pause was long enough to make him sweat. "I've seen the scans," Quinn whispered. "Yours and theirs." Before Naseem could ask who theirs referred to, a rapid, muffled knock echoed through Quinn's phone. Someone was at his door. Quinn's breathing quickened, but he kept talking, voice trembling. "There were 8 of them in my care who developed that vertical compression pattern. We sent them to a private clinic in Reading. They underwent an experimental recovery treatment, a rapid neural rehydration therapy. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Every one of them is gone now," Quinn continued. 3 families were told they moved overseas. 1 was cremated before the family was notified. The others transferred. He didn't say where. Then Quinn mentioned a set of numbers. 973. He said each fighter muttered it in their sleep, tapping their beds with a clenched fist. When questioned, they'd become violent, then forget the entire episode. Before Naseem could ask what 973 meant, Quinn's voice broke. "They'll say it's dehydration. Age, trauma, they always do. But this pattern, it didn't exist before 1998. Ask yourself, Prince, what changed? Suddenly, the phone fell. Heavy footsteps thundered across a wooden floor. Furniture scraped, a grunt, a choke, something slammed. The line stayed open for 14 chilling seconds, just silence and tapping. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. Then the call ended. The next morning, Quinn's number was disconnected. His home gym's website returned 404 errors. His YouTube interviews vanished. One archived post remained long enough for fans to screen capture it. He'd written only one sentence. "It's not just damage, it's programming." Hours later, the account was wiped. And for the first time, Naseem realized something horrifying. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordinated. By the next morning, the live stream clip had been downloaded, mirrored, and dissected by every combat sports Reddit thread in existence. That's when a medical researcher reached out to Naseem privately through an encrypted email service. He claimed he'd worked on something called the Compression Gap Study, funded quietly through a sports medicine board in 2004. Naseem agreed to meet him in person at a small diagnostic center outside London. The researcher looked exhausted, eyes ringed by sleepless nights. He didn't shake hands. He didn't smile. He slid a folder across the table, head down. Inside were brain scans, dozens, all retired fighters, all post-career. Every single one showed vertical ridge lines near the frontal lobe, as if something had folded the brain inward like fabric. Some ridges formed channels that looked almost organized, not chaotic. "It's structural pooling," the researcher whispered, "like gravity's pulling tissue downward when the fighter sleeps. But gravity can't do that. Not vertically, not in isolated regions. This isn't natural concussion damage. Someone forced this adaptation." He leaned closer. "And these ridges only appear in fighters who visited experimental recovery clinics between 1998 and 2008. Naseem frowned. He'd visited one of those clinics after an injury. Suddenly, the tremors made sense. Too much sense. The researcher continued, "The therapy used a compound called NRZ3, a neural rehydration serum. It was supposed to speed recovery. Instead, it caused microswelling in the brain. The swelling forced tissue downward. Repeated cycles compressed it permanently. Why hadn't anyone reported this?" The researcher slid another document, a memo stamped "Withdrawn," signed by a pharmaceutical subsidiary. "It did something else," he said quietly. "It created new pathways." His voice dropped. "When certain frequencies hit those pathways, patients respond involuntarily. Numbers, tapping, violent dreams. You're not hallucinating." Suddenly, the building lights dimmed. Power dipped. A hum reverberated through the walls. Mechanical, low, vibrating the glass panels. The researcher stiffened. "That's what triggers them," he whispered. "Low resonance at 973 hertz. That's where the number comes from. It's not random. It's frequency recall." Before he could explain further, 2 men in gray suits walked through the lobby, silent and synchronized. No badges, no clipboards, no greeting. They approached the front desk, showed something metallic, and the receptionist immediately pointed upstairs toward them. The researcher's voice cracked. "You need to leave right now." Naseem grabbed the folder and slipped out a side door, heart pounding. He didn't look back. Back inside, footsteps echoed, then silence. Minutes later, the clinic's website went offline, and when Naseem checked the folder in his car, one page had changed. It now read, "Participant response required." Someone knew he'd seen it. Someone expected a reaction. And if the frequency truly triggered involuntary behavior, Naseem had just stepped into a network of fighters who weren't sick. They were activated. That night, after barely sleeping, Naseem dug through old storage boxes in his garage. Beneath dusty gloves, rotting hand wraps, and stacks of fight posters, he found it. A half-erased VHS tape marked SPAR 12/03/99. Keep in fading marker. He remembered that day vividly. 3 fighters collapsed during light sparring. No headshots, no knockdowns, just sudden crumpling, like puppets with their strings cut. He rushed the tape to an old player, rewound it, and pressed play. The shaky gym cam showed sweaty fighters circling in slow drills. Then, without warning, one man paused mid-jab, eyes unfocused, knees buckling. He hit the floor, convulsing. A second fighter stumbled backward, clutching his skull. He wasn't punched, he simply fell. The last collapsed face first, twitching, knuckles tapping the canvas rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. tap. The trainer panicked, waving the cameraman away. But before the footage cut, a chilling sound bled through the speakers. A faint mechanical hum, low and vibrating. The timestamp glitched. The picture warped. For 2 seconds, the screen showed static, layered with a flashing number. 973. But when he rewound, those frames were gone. Digitally overwritten. Naseem froze. Then, something worse hit him. He remembered news from the early 2000s. 3 promising prospects retired suddenly due to mysterious neurological complications. He searched them. Every article was now archived behind paywalls. Clicking them returned error 451, unavailable for legal reasons. He Googled their names again. Autocomplete no longer recognized them. It was like they'd never existed. He contacted the gym owner who recorded the tape. The call dropped immediately. When he called back, a monotone voice answered instead, "This number is no longer in service." Naseem walked outside to clear his head, but as he stepped onto the street, a black SUV idled at the curb, headlights off. The windows were tinted. When he stared, the engine rumbled, then rolled away quietly. No plates on the rear bumper. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "Stop digging." No sender, no timestamp, just those 2 words. Now his hands shook, not from tremors, but fear. Because this wasn't just medical negligence, this was suppression. And if that clinic, that frequency, and those collapses tied together, it meant the people running boxing's recovery solutions didn't just know. They'd known for decades. And the fighters who could expose them were collapsing, one by one. In the days following his discovery, Naseem began digging deeper into retired fighters from his era. Not the famous ones, but the forgotten ones. Men who slipped away quietly. As he contacted their families, a chilling pattern emerged. Wives, children, even neighbors described the same horrifying phenomenon. Every one of these fighters had started sleep-talking in violent bursts. Not nightmares about punches, not shouts for help. Instead, they whispered jabs and combinations like programming. Left hook, slip, right cross, reset. Then came the numbers. Always whispered, always identical. 9, 7, 3. One wife described waking up to find her husband standing at the foot of the bed, eyes unfocused, lips quivering as he whispered rhythmically, tapping his thigh with curled fingers. When she tried to wake him, he snarled and shoved her with strength he'd never shown. The next morning, he remembered nothing. Another family recorded their loved one pacing the hallway, tapping the wall 3 times, then pausing, repeating. Doctors diagnosed stress, but the tapping matched the frequency pattern the researcher had warned about. In one particularly disturbing video clip, an ex-middleweight shadowboxed in his kitchen at 3 a.m. His movements were jerky, as if someone was remote controlling his limbs. Every combination ended with a violent snapping motion toward his own forehead. Prolonged exposure to NRZ3, the families were told, creates protective neural pathways. But the scans told a different story. Compression ridges lined up like tracks, channels, highways for something. When Naseem asked whether these fighters had ever undergone experimental hydration therapy, every family said yes. The clinic paperwork was eerily identical. Black ink, same signatures, same stamped approval from a sports science board that no longer exists. When Naseem tried to research it, the organization's entire web presence had been scrubbed. Late that night, his phone buzzed again. A blocked voicemail message, "You're close, too close. Stop before activation reaches you." No name, no breathing, just the faint hum of low frequency in the background. He clutched his skull, tremors firing down his jaw, because now the ringing in his ears had started whispering too. It sounded like a countdown, and it ended with 973. If the fighter's symptoms were truly linked to old recovery therapies, then someone had paid for them, and nobody in boxing spends money without a receipt. Naseem began digging through archived emails, forwarded contracts, and old promotional agreements. That's when an anonymous source, claiming to be a former assistant for a major promoter, sent him a compressed file labeled archive_red. Inside were dozens of internal emails from the early 2000s. At first, they seemed harmless. Discussions about fight scheduling, athletic athletic commissions, broadcast rights. But one thread, dated 2005, made Naseem's blood run cold. A promoter asked a medical board representative, "Will the NRZ hydration series interfere with scanning protocols?" The reply, "Only if cameras catch the tremors. Advise corner personnel to distract commentary if motor collapse begins." Motor collapse. The exact neurological jerk families had been reporting. Another email, much shorter, was worse. Once activation surfaces, keep media angles wide. Wide shots, distance, so viewers couldn't zoom in on spasms. There were also payment logs, millions funneled quietly into private clinics under vague labels like Athlete Recovery Program and Neurological Support Initiative, but the clinic addresses didn't list rehabilitation facilities. They were leased spaces tied to pharmaceutical shell companies. Even stranger, one promoter sent a congratulatory message. "Great news! Compression ridges present across 7 subjects. This means adaptation is stabilizing." Adaptation to what? Then came the final email in the thread, sent with no greeting, no signature. Stage 2, pending. Frequency testing scheduled. Frequency, just like the researcher warned. Naseem forwarded the files to investigative journalists. Hours later, one replied back, "Where did these come from? The timestamps are real." But this thread didn't appear in the official subpoena log, meaning the emails were deliberately withheld during past lawsuits. A second journalist responded, then deleted their reply seconds later. Their final message read, "I can't be involved." That same night, someone knocked on Naseem's door. Not forceful, slow, deliberate. When he peered through the curtains, a man in a gray coat stood motionless, staring up at his window. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. After a full minute, he walked away, silently. The next morning, all the forwarded emails were corrupted. The archive file wouldn't open. Every journalist Naseem contacted stopped responding. Only one message remained in his inbox, a cloaked warning. The adaptation isn't the danger. The activation is. At this point, Naseem realized something horrifying. Whatever NRZ created inside fighters' brains, it hadn't switched on yet. And once it did, no one knew what those compressed neural pathways would be capable of obeying. The next day, driven by fear and curiosity, Naseem drove to the reading clinic Quinn mentioned. It didn't look medical at all. Thick glass doors, reinforced corners, cameras that didn't blink. A receptionist greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He asked for records of the fighters who'd checked in. Her smile froze. "We don't handle walk-ins." Naseem pretended to leave, but slipped down a side hallway. The air smelled like bleach and metal. Through a narrow window in an observation room, he spotted a man pacing, shoulders slumped, eyes glassy. His fists tapped the glass in rapid sets of 3. A nurse rushed in, shining a small blinking device near his temple. Instantly, he went limp, like a switch flipped. A clipboard hung outside the room. Not a medical name, a corporate one. Guardianship signed not by family, but by a promotional company. Footsteps thundered. A guard grabbed Naseem by the arm, pushing him back toward the lobby. "Wrong wing," he said, too calmly. As Naseem glanced back, the patient pressed his face against the glass, whispering one word silently, "Activate." Outside, the receptionist's smile was still there, too wide. "Come back with a referral," she said. He never would. That night, Naseem contacted 2 journalists again. Both inboxes bounced back. Emails no longer active. He checked social media. Their accounts wiped clean. He dialed Quinn's old assistant, straight to voicemail. But the greeting had changed. User unavailable. He called the families of affected fighters again. Phones disconnected. One house he visited had been emptied. No furniture, burned documents in the driveway. Neighbors claimed the family moved overnight. Naseem returned home, rattled. Outside his window, frost had formed on the glass despite warm weather. At first it looked random, then clearer. Curved strokes, carved into cold crystal. 973. His phone vibrated violently. A voicemail, auto-downloaded. No voice, only the same low hum he heard in the gym footage, vibrating down his spine. His jaw clenched uncontrollably. Tremors rippled across his fingers. They weren't symptoms. They were responses. He dropped the phone, shaking. Suddenly, he remembered something from the email thread. Stage 2 pending. Not compression, not adaptation. Activation. Fighters weren't breaking down, they were being prepared, and whatever phase was coming, it had already started. The following evening, without warning, Naseem went live again. His camera shook in his hands. His jaw twitched uncontrollably now. He spoke fast, terrified. "It's not deterioration," he whispered. "It's conditioning. They built pathways in us, and now they're trying to turn them on." He held up a scan of his own brain, compression ridges like fingerprints. He begged active fighters to avoid the private clinics, to demand independent scans, to stop letting promoters sign medical waivers on their behalf. Mid-sentence, a low hum bled through the stream's audio. Naseem's eyes went wide. His fingers curled, tapping 3 times on his desk. Tap, tap, tap. The feed abruptly cut to black. Hours later, his channel was deleted. All that remained was a single frozen frame in the comments section. 973.